Rob, lovely to see you. Brundingthorpe here, Brundingthorpe there, Brundingthorpe everywhere. I'm sure you've been flat out, and we've lots of drivers that want to talk about that with whom you've been working. But above all, I imagine you've been delighted the way 2016 has worked out for Kimi, because Vettel's not an easy guy to have alongside you at Ferrari, and he's looked pretty good all year.
He's looked very, very good, and I've been saying this for many years. All right, he was a bit off the pace earlier, but nevertheless he's settled in nicely. And here's the Vettel. Don't forget, 4 years ago has been talked about as a great. You know, do we put him in the great level for consecutive titles? And Kimi outqualified him 11, 10, and often outraced him as well. And so yes, it's been nice because it seemed to be the only one that was saying it, and it was very easy. It was like a little trophy you could get.
Well, tell us why you've always been a Kimi believer, and remind some viewers of when you first started to work with Kimi. How long ago was it?
Oh, it started, I don't know, would it be 15 years ago, I guess. I'm not sure.
But it's Formula Renault period.
Yeah, that point. But he has a superb feel for when the weight is coming down on the driving wheel, having completed a corner, and the throttle meeting that without, in the traction control days, an excess of traction control, without hurting the rear tyre. And it's just a lovely relationship between himself and the surface, and particularly through his feet.
Okay, that's the back end of the car on exit. At his peak, how good was he with the front end of the car, manipulating the front, getting the platform right?
He was good, but he was always still is a little bit traditional, that if he could get a front end that would point in for him, rather than him making the front end point in, then away he went. In terms of actual rotation, no, there are people coming through karting, who can do that better. And so yes, he's reliant on a car that will follow its nose.
And what did we see in 2016? We saw Kimi definitely upping his qualifying ante, as you've just said with the stats, because that was something that was hurting him in his comeback to Formula One from Lotus and then the early Ferrari years. Qualifying is now, he appears to have got it kind of licked. But racing still difficult for him to get the car to be consistent over a full race distance, the tyres, should we say?
I would say it would be more the front tyres that he might be saddled with a little bit of understeer. Don't forget, Vettel, as we know, is all about the exit in point and a bit of a late turn in from Vettel.
But very good at he does a lot of V corners, doesn't he? He breaks in a straight line and into
slightly shorter corners than Kimi, whereas Kimi is a little bit more of a Lincoln Continental in terms of getting the car turned, and he has a very nice feel with it, but it can lead to a little bit more understeer, and it could wear out the loaded front tyre a little bit more. So,
but what is it? Because we had this problem at Lotus right at the beginning with the steering rack load, didn't he? When James Allison was there, and actually, interestingly. And what is it then about Kimi's turn-in that makes that is so sensitive? A, to the steering rack load, and B, to overusing the front tyres?
Well, the overusing the front tyres is just a slight lack of rotation. He's not a flick driver. He is more. The problem often used to be looking after the rears, and of course he looks after that beautifully, because that's done a little bit more with the feet, because it includes the acceleration. He just does not want that to pick it up and point it that way. He just wants the car. You could say it's a little bit lazy in doing that, but he's come through areas where you could make cars do that, and tyres didn't degrade like they do these days. And so even if you had a tiny bit of understeer, well, that always equals traction. If you've got a bit of push, it means the car's sort of going forward still. So he's not an oversteer type driver.
It's an interesting point you make, that looking after the rears is his forte. Yeah. But that's perhaps not quite as important these days as it used to be. If he was driving a 250F Maserati, it'd be a different story.
Yeah, that's right. So he needs to just get a little more bite, just a slightly better rotation. That's all it is. And if you've got relatively traditional circuits that have a slightly softer turn in, you'll get, because all tracks have chicanes these days, but once you get out of the chicane 90-degree type third gear-ishy.
Cops Corner, Silverstone.
Yeah, or slower than that. You can get slower ones that have a slightly slower turn. And turn 4 at Spa,
Right.
for instance, it has a name. It's that.
Top of the hill, Les Combes.
No. The
Oh, that
180.
right. Okay.
The 180 is
The
just going
downhill
down.
negative camber right hand.
Now that's when they have that little roundy bit going in. That makes for a softer turn, and so you're not asking as much of the driver or the car. You can't flick it in there because if you get the thing pointed too early, you've still got a lot of corner to go. So those ones that naturally have that, Kimi's going to be just fine on that on the more traditional circuits. It's the flick ones, or at least the 90-degree ones that go on a little bit longer. A flick you can it's not necessarily going to wear out your tyres. Say the last section at in Spain, in Barcelona, it's not going to wear your tyres out. It's a bit of an ugly.
But the Sector 2 in Abu Dhabi, for example, would be anti-Kimi.
Yeah, something that just goes on a little bit, a little bit longer than a flick.
Which we saw in the race. He did eat through the fronts once the race was underway, and compare with Seb, which was sad for Kimi, given the way he qualified.
Indeed, he was I think fast.
So how can he work on that? What would you advise? I mean, can that be solved?
Oh, of course it can be solved. Yeah, you could. You'd go with the team and say, is there any way we can get this nose pointed in just a little better without compromising traction? That would be what you'd be aiming to do. And there'd be Jockler and the rest of them down there. They'll have a lot of potions that they can apply to that. And with Kimi, you would just say, look, just a little bit faster with the second phase of your steering. Just a little, that introduction, that's great what he does, because it's a weight transfer to the outside. But the bit that comes after that, if it could be just a little bit faster and a fraction more, we're only talking a fractional change for quite a change, so that there's a tiny bit more rotation, which means you have a chance of taking a tiny bit of steering out of it and then taking a little
But if I put on more steering, I get understeer on the car. That's why I don't do this.
I wouldn't speak like that about the sainted Kimi.
But that's what he would say, isn't it? I tried that, Rob. I've tried to put on a bit more, and all it does is understeer.
Well, then that's a question of then coming off the brake just a little bit slow and giving up a tiny bit of a little bit of minimum speed for rotation. And so then,
because it's all interlinked, coming out of the brake pedal pressure, the load on the steering, what the nose of the car is doing, where the dynamic weights are at any given moment.
Yes, going that way is the bit that needs to be working, going into the corner and coming off the rate you come off the brake, the rate you turn the steering wheel. That's what it is. He's great once it's going that way with his feet when it comes to feeling where's the grip level. But the other bit, you just want to point just a tiny bit more with a little bit of help from the car, perhaps.
Perhaps you ought to get down to Maranello and have a word to Jock Clear and the boys and get it all sorted, Rob.
Look here, Jock.
Well, you're actually off, aren't you, fairly soon?
Yes, we'll be down there. There's a couple of little projects.
Well, we look forward with interest to see what happens there, Rob. Thank you.